Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, and it's story time with Uncle Davey. Well, this is just I may have told pieces of this or the whole thing before. I don't remember, but it was something that was on my mind, and so I thought I'd get it out here. Maybe again. Who knows? It was my one day at the Peabody Conservatory. Back in my college days, I went to Johns Hopkins University, and I matriculated, as the word goes, in 1979. And in 1979, it had only been 2 years since the Peabody Conservatory had merged with Johns Hopkins, and it was a very exciting thing. I mean, it was a big deal because it allowed us to do coursework at the conservatory, and I was very interested in doing that. So, I mean, it was a few years into my tenure there, and I decided to take a couple music appreciation classes, not because I needed to. Mind you, I was already classical music director at WJHU radio station, but I figured I would pad my GPA, because how hard could they be, right? And they were being taught by Peabody professors. So it was like just an ideal opportunity to sort of scope out the territory. And I was going to concerts, and I was also taking clarinet lessons with a Peabody student as well. So, I mean, I was sort of buzzing around there anyway at the time. So I had my music appreciation classes. They were taught by two eminent composition professors, one of whom was a modern music guy who insisted that only graphic notation was legitimate. I mean, he was a real solid, hardcore dodecaphonist, academic serialist guy. I mean, even the academic serialists were too tame for him. So he's talking about all this older music as though it's completely invalid and worthless, and the only thing that means anything is something that has graphs and random things and computers, and it's just wonderful. So we would argue about that. But anyway, he said to me, you really ought to do some music theory at Peabody. Why don't you come and do it? And so I said, sure, why not? I thought I would take music theory because my music theory is terrible. You can tell me that, I'm sure, because you correct me routinely. I mean, I've learned some things since then, but still, it was just terrible. So in order to take music theory, you had to take a placement exam. And so I signed up for the placement exam, and I show up for the placement exam in the lecture hall at Peabody, and they pass it out. It's a graded exam. They graded meaning grades of difficulty. You do as much of it as you can, and they know what class you should go into. Well, it had all kinds of things. You had to do figured bass. I knew what a figured bass was. You had to do a harmonic analysis of the root melody of the third movement of Brahms' Third Symphony. All I knew was that for harmonic analysis and figured bass things, you wrote the chords by putting numbers in there. So I looked at the bass line, and I knew it was in F major, basically, and I counted up from F and put little numbers there. It was all wrong. I had no clue what I was doing. And then you had to write a Renaissance motet, and you had to do all kinds of stuff. I mean, the basics, because I played an instrument. I mean, I could read keys, I could read notes, I knew all that stuff. But anything more sophisticated along the lines of compositional theory, no, it was impossible. But anyway, I'm sitting there taking this test, and 5 minutes into it, half the people in the room got up and left. I mean, they didn't even start. They signed their name and they walked out. And I was just like, okay, whatever that was, while I was sweating through my 5-voice Renaissance motet example that I did everything just for the fun of it. God knows what it looked like. But at the very end of it were 5 identifications. And you had to identify the composers. They give you 5 bits of score, just a page, and with no other mark, names or things. You had to say who the composer was. You didn't even have to say what the work was, which was kind of amazing. And they were, respectively, a Haydn string quartet, a Brahms symphony, Webern's symphony, Messiaen's Et Expecto Resurrectione Mortuorum, and a Debussy prelude, piano. That's what they were. I knew what they all were. I knew who the composers were. I even knew what the works were. So I wrote them all down, and that was the part I felt really good about because I got it all right, handed the thing in, and I left. So a week later, we are at our music appreciation class, and the professor who was proctoring this thing and who graded these things looked at me and he said, you don't know anything about music theory, but you are the only person who got the identifications correct, all of them, and you even knew the works. I said, well, And he's like, what are you doing here at music appreciation? I said, well, I'm padding my GPA. So they placed me in the intro elementary theory class, naturally. And I said to him, who were all those people who left? I mean, half the people just walked out without even putting pen to paper. And he looked at me and said, oh, those were all the voice majors. So it taught me something right there, didn't it? Anyway, so the voice majors were all gone. I was in my theory class and everything was going to go swimmingly. So I show up for my first day of theory class and I'm waiting for the class to begin. And I see the professor of music theory talking to another professor who taught the second phase of music theory, which the first phase, because I was in the second phase by then, and so I knew both of these guys. And I was just sort of walking past, and they didn't see me. They were facing the other direction. One of them says to the other, we have too many Jews in theory this year, don't we? And then I said, oh, yes, so many Jews. I can't believe it. I don't know what we're going to do about it. And I said to myself, I know exactly what we're going to do about it. They've got one less. And I left. I never showed up at theory class at all. And that was my one day of purported coursework at the Peabody Conservatory in 1981, somewhere in there, because I was class of 73 when I graduated. So I guess I was a sophomore, something like that. Anyway, it was a very interesting experience, and that was the end of my opportunity to have formal music theory education. I wasn't going to go through any aggravation. I had better things to do with my time. So there you have it, my friends. That's the story. My one day at the Peabody Conservatory. Now, I'm not saying this to mock the Peabody Conservatory or to say anything about any policy at the Peabody Conservatory. I think we're just dealing with a couple of jerks who were like failed composers, and they were just jawing. But it was certainly interesting to overhear. So that's it. That's why my music theory isn't as polished as it ought to be. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me for Dave's Story Time. Take care.